Happy New Year BookTube and welcome to my first video of 2022. If you're new to the channel, I'm Jack. If you're not new, welcome back to Spread Book Joy. And hopefully you noticed I've got a new credits, and if you've been onto my channel you might see a new banner, there's a new logo. I thought I'd freshen up for the new year, and also because I've been off for a while and I've been reflecting on Spread Book Joy and how to make it work for me moving forward, given all the changes in my life since I started the channel, then I thought I'd just do a whole revamp. So I've got new everything for the start of the new year, which is wonderful. So today's video, I've been watching loads and loads of people's best of 2021, and so today is my highs and lows, lessons learned and plans video. I'm going to do it all in one, so I'm not going to have several videos. Hopefully this one won't be hugely long, but this one I'm going to talk about my highlights of the year in terms of my reading, and I'm just going to talk about my personal reading. I'm not going to include children's books. I'm going to do a separate video for children's books, a separate blog post video and post on Instagram for that. This is just about my personal reading, and I'm going to talk about two sort of categories of books. I couldn't pick a top 10, I couldn't pick a top 5 or a top 3, I couldn't pick favourites from different categories, so I'm just going to talk about books that enthralled me. So that should be like books that highly entertained me, that kept me wanting to read, and they're not necessarily the most well-written books. They might be just most entertaining books, basically. And I'm going to talk about books that stayed with me, and by stayed with me, they're the books that I put in. If I were rating books, they would be my highest rated books. And I'll talk about ratings in a bit when I come to plans and things, changes and lessons learned. So when I come to that sort of reflective section, I'll talk about ratings there. But those would be my highest rated books, because they're the sort of books that you might not notice it when you first read them, but you pick them up, you read them, and then you chew over them, and you find yourself thinking about them weeks, days, months later, and talking to people about them, and the impact they have on you grows. You know, the kind of book. So I read 88 books this year. I set myself a target of 80. I read 88. I've set a numerical value, and I'll talk about that when I come to my reading goals for this year. Reading goals, reading intentions, reading plans. But the numerical value means very little to me. I just like to track my reading. And the reading challenge in Goodreads, I just like the page they give you at the end of the year. So you know, my year in books. If you don't set your reading challenge, do you still get your year in books? Someone tell me in the comments, because I always feel like that's why I have to set a reading challenge, but I might be wrong. I might still get that, but I'll talk about Goodreads a bit later. So the first book that had an impact on me, and it's a while ago since I read it, so I read it way back in January or February, was The Mercies by Kieran Millward Hargrave. I believe it's Kieran Millward Hargrave's. She's a writer mainly of children's fiction and YA fiction, and I think this is her first book for adults, and it is a brilliant book. It is all around a true event that happened in Norway in the 17th century. There was a huge storm and a shipwreck, and an island off the coast of Norway. All of the men died in this small village, this fishing village, because they were all out fishing. And then there were witch trials taking place. After the women were left on their own, they had to fend for themselves, which they did, and because they were able to fend for themselves, they had to survive. Someone took it upon themselves to decide that they were witches, and they must have caused the storm, and there were witch trials. So it's based on that true event, and it was a book that basically it gave me a proper sucker punch, a gut punch at the end. I was kind of breathless after I finished reading it. It's a tale of female friendship, and anyway, it was a fabulous book. I haven't reread it. I would like to reread it, but she is an excellent writer, and yeah, I highly recommend it. It's not a cheerful book, of course, but it was a book that made me think, made me cry, and like I said, actually at the end of finished reading it, I felt like I was out of breath, because I felt like I've been holding my breath reading it. So wonderful, really excellent. Next up, the book that had an impact on me, which might be a surprising one, was Somebody to Love, which was the life, death and legacy of Freddie Mercury. Now, I watched Bohemian Rhapsody, I thought there's got to be a better biography of Freddie Mercury out there, and I found this one, and this one was really interesting to me because I'd also just watched It's a Sin on Channel 4, which was all about the AIDS epidemic starting in the UK over here, and Somebody to Love is the story of the AIDS epidemic and how AIDS spread around the world, where it originated, how it spread around the world so quickly, the role that the Reagan administration had in suppressing AIDS research, which is horrific, by the way. So it's the story of Freddie Mercury's life told alongside snippets of the AIDS epidemic, and I learned a lot, and I cried. It was very sad, but a great book, really good. In April, I finally read The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, and I'm going to read more by him. That book was absolutely one of those ones that you just constantly think about afterwards. The character of Stevens is someone who I just felt sorry for, who was a very sad character, and I read that book and it was heartbreaking, and it was beautifully written, and there was an undercurrent of things in it which I won't talk about because I don't want to do spoilers, but yeah, it was excellent. Another book that I absolutely loved, I read What Matters in Austen. I listened to it actually on audio, which is 20 Crucial Puzzles Solved. If you're a Jane Austen fan and you've read all of her big 6 novels, then it's a great series of essays of things, the minutiae of Jane Austen's writing and what these things actually mean, and the underlying messages and social cues that we as modern readers miss because we're not reading them with the Regency period. People would have known the impact of the way that people address each other, for instance. So yeah, a really excellent book, one I'll definitely be going back to. As part of Jane Austen July, the book that I enjoyed the most was Northanger Abbey, and that's one of the books that could fall into both categories for books that carried on making me think made me think and made me want to reread it to notice certain things again, and a book that highly entertained me. I was enthralled by it, I was completely entertained. It's definitely Jane Austen's funniest book. I did a ranking of Jane Austen's books as well back then, which I'll put a link to, which when I reread Northanger Abbey, I think it will be jumping up the rankings for me. It's a book that I think is highly underrated for Jane Austen, but brilliant. In October, I read The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, and that is one that I will definitely reread. It is a book that has a lot of layers to it, and I absolutely loved it, and it's also just a great story. To be honest with you, it's in terms of plot, aside from the plot that everybody knows, there's Dorian Gray, there's a portrait painted of him, and he makes a wish that the portrait will grow old while he stays eternally young. That's kind of the main part of the plot, but in terms of action there isn't a lot, but there is a lot to think about, a lot to chew over, and fantastic writing by Oscar Wilde, some brilliant lines, obviously some amazing quotes, and it's definitely a book I'll go back to again in future. I'm going to mention one that is a children's book now, and I did say I wasn't going to keep children's books out of it, but I am going to give an honourable mention here for a book that stayed with me and a book that I would love to reread at some point, and that is Where the Red Fern Grows by Wilson Rules. And this was a book recommended by AJ Dunn from AJ Dunn Reads and Writes, and AJ Dunn should get commission because of the amount of people who've read Where the Red Fern Grows. Because of them is phenomenal on YouTube. It's a brilliant book. It's a classic children's book set in the Ozarks about a boy raising some puppies, and beautifully written and really poignant. I loved it. Last book that I'm going to talk about that will stay with me and that I will reread and I will recommend to people, and that is Octavia E. Butler's Parable of the Sower. That was one of the goals I set myself last year, was to read some work by Octavia E. Butler, and I'm so glad I did. I'm currently reading The Parable of the Talents, and these are books that fall into both camps, books that I can't put down and that make me think. So absolutely fantastic dystopian fiction, really good. So next up, I'm just going to talk about the books that enthralled me, the books that I absolutely loved. I've recommended to quite a few people, and they're just highly entertaining, the books you can't put down, and there were quite a lot of them. So I'm not going to talk about them all at length. The first one was Half a World Away by Mike Gale, which is a story of two siblings who are separated after going into the care system and then find each other as adults. Real tearjerker. Next was The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. Don't need to explain it. Some old people get together to try and solve cold cases and a real murder happens. really funny, really entertaining. Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. This is one that I thought would be in my books that stayed with me category. It kind of does tip into it a little bit, but there are some things in it, I don't know if I'll ever reread it. So it's kind of one that's enthralled me that I may or may not reread, but I would highly recommend to anyone. There's a reason it's so popular. I'd put off reading it for a while, but someone sent it to me, my friend Sally, and she absolutely nailed it. It was a brilliant book. Really looking forward to the film when it comes out. The Art of Racing in the Rain by Garth Stein. I've talked about it a lot on this channel, don't need to say much. It's about a family as told through the eyes of their dog Enzo, and yes, tissues were needed. Dear Mrs. Bird by AJ Pierce, story of a young girl during the Blitz in London who wants to be a reporter, and she ends up answering letters for an agony aunt. I won't say much more than that. It was just a wonderfully entertaining book with actually some really dark moments in it, and it did make me think about the plight of women in the home front during World War II. So yeah, it was a great book. The Last Dog on Earth by Adrian J. Walker, a brilliant dystopian fiction set in London, told from the perspective of a dog and his owner. Yeah, a lot of dog protagonists this year, which I've loved, by the way. It's been fantastic. But yeah, this is really, really good dystopian fiction. If you like dystopian, I'd highly recommend it. I really like books that are dystopian that are set where I'm from as well, so the fact it was set in London really appealed to me. And lastly, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo and Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I don't know why it took me so long to read anything by that author, because she's hugely popular, and now I know why. She writes a ripping yarn, like the sort of excellent kind of gossip column. One's about a aging Hollywood starlet, the other's about a band in the 70s that have broken up and no one knows why. Both told in a kind of interview format. Daisy Jones more sort of interview recounts of people, whereas Evelyn Hugo I think was a better book for me. Evelyn Hugo is the better book, though there were one element of it that I could have done without, but I won't talk about that in case of spoilers. But yeah, both books that I couldn't put down, and I'm really looking forward to reading more by that author. One of my goals this year was to finally finish the Discworld series, and I didn't manage it because I decided I needed to reread a lot of the Discworld series before I read the end of the Discworld series. So yeah, Terry Pratchett was my most read author this year. I read 10 books by Terry Pratchett, and actually I thoroughly enjoyed the majority of what I read. Some of them I read and I thought, oh, that's not as good as I remember it being, but I still thoroughly enjoyed them because I love the world, and it was a place where I could step into in times when I just couldn't read anything else. I can always read a Discworld book or listen to a Discworld book. I'm going to do a video on my favourite Discworld books. I think I should probably wait until I finish the series though. I was thinking I was just a self-indulgent Discworld video, but actually until I've finished the entire series I can't really talk about my favourite ones as such. I suppose I could talk about my favourite ones so far, but we'll see. But yeah, that's one of my plans for the coming year. So some lessons learned this year. There's a few things that have influenced this little thing about lessons learned. I'm not going to set all these different goals for myself this year. One is basically myself. I don't want to feel pressure to announce on here that I'm going to read the entire Discworld series. I'm going to read all of this the works of a particular author or whatever. I don't want to announce it on here and then feel pressured to doing it. Another thing is I watched a great video by Gina Stanya about goal setting and the toxic sort of influence of how goals can be negative in lots of ways, and how you can get along quite happily without them. And my sort of reading style as a mood reader, I just want to be happy with what I read, so I don't want to put pressure on myself. And I know it's myself that does the pressure, it's not announcing it on here, but I don't want to put pressure on myself to read things that I'm not in the mood for reading. So my goals this year is, I've got some plans because I do need structure. As someone, I agreed with a lot of what Gina said, I really did. I thought what she said was really valuable. But as someone who has anxiety, I really need structure in my life. So, and that sounds weird for me to say, I'm a mood reader who needs structure, but hear me out. There are certain things that I do need to know. Like I need to know if I'm buddy reading, when that's happening and when that's coming up. Those are the sorts of things I mean by structure. So aside from knowing I want to take part in Jane Austen July, Victober, and I want wiggle room to take part in things that crop up on YouTube, on BookTube and Bookstagram as and when I want to do them. So my plan is trying to have the no plan, basically to have some structure but some wiggle room each month to follow my nose. So the other part of not being pressured is I've decided, and I learned this year, I don't like reviewing books that I'm pressurized to review. So on NetGalley I've got 2 books that I requested and got, and I am interested in, but for some reason, because I knew I had to read them for NetGalley, I've not been interested in them. Likewise, I've had a couple of unsolicited reviews I did this year, and I joined some tandem read-alongs and things like that, and the minute it started I regretted it. Not that I didn't enjoy what I read, I did, but knowing I had to do it by a certain timescale, or knowing someone's waiting for me to do that, just suddenly sucks the joy out of it for me. So I've decided I'm a reviewer who just reviews what I want to review. Or if someone approaches me with their book, and they're an indie author as well, if I'm interested in the book, I will buy it and review it in my own time, and that will support them too, right? So yeah, it's something that I've had to realise. And added to that is not putting pressure on myself to be a joiner and join in absolutely everything just because it's something that I really want to support whoever's running the readathon, or because it's, you know, a series that I love. So there are a few things I am joining in this year which I really want to, and I'm really looking forward to, but I'm not going to overcommit, because that leads to stress and leads to worry. One thing I'm going to try and do is I was going to switch entirely from Goodreads to Storygraph. If you've not heard of Storygraph, I'm going to do a video on it. It's set up as an alternative to Goodreads, an Amazon free alternative to track your reading electronically, and it also provides you with, it's got a really clean interface, unlike all that clutter on Goodreads, and it's got provides you with suggested reading based on a survey that you take, and it's supposed to be far more accurate than Goodreads. And there are much more nuanced ways of reviewing the books than just giving it a 5-star rating or rating out of 5. They've got a 5-star rating system, but you can do 3.25, 3.5, 3.75, etc. So you can do kind of more nuanced ratings. Now, I don't rate books on here, and I've been following with massive interest the ratings and reviews debate over on Gunpowder Fiction and Plot, which is running. Scott and Nell have been talking about ratings and reviews and debating it for some time now, and I will be doing their tag. And it's made me think, because I do rate my books, but I rate them for me. So my Storygraph I'm going to be running alongside my Goodreads this year, because I'm not sure I quite trust Storygraph to store all of my reading records safely, because the other day I logged into it for the first time. I'm adding books, I'm doing stuff, and I'll show it to you, but it suddenly wouldn't work, so I couldn't access it, and it freaked me out. So I'm still going to keep my Goodreads. I'm going to run both this year and do a comparison and decide at the end of the year to switch over or not. But I do feel Storygraph will give me it's going to be private Storygraph, I'm not going to share it publicly. I want a private place, because I don't rate books for you guys, I rate them for me, because I've got a terrible memory. So I rate my books according to this 5-star rating system generally, but after watching all of Scott and Nell's stuff, I've realised that there's a lot of flaw to it. And I was looking through all my ratings on Goodreads recently, and I was like, how is this rated the same as that, for example? So I think Storygraph will give me a better, more nuanced way of recording my thoughts and my summative kind of judgment of a book for me. So yeah, I'm hoping it will do that. So another thing that I did this year, it was one of my favourite videos actually, it was my TBR counting video and my sort of book buying ban, and it kind of went well for the most part. The book buying ban will continue, not because I feel any guilt over my TBR anymore, because again, the amazing Gina Stania, Gina, you've had a lot of influence on me recently. She talks about her book collecting as building a personal library, a library of books that she can just go to like it was any old library and just pick out something she wants to read And yeah, I love that. I was like, yes, that's exactly what it is, because I love books as objects. I love books to collect. So my book buying ban will continue, but not because of that, but because one is I don't have a lot of money to spend on books, and this is something that's becoming more and more apparent. And one thing we're going to have to do, we're looking to do this year, is sell up our house, because it's just too expensive to live in the house we're currently living in. So we want to sell the house and move. And part of selling the house will also mean I've got to clear my really cluttered bookshelves and all of this that you see behind me, that my house looks in a, sellable condition. When people walk in, it's not cluttered and clustered with stuff. So until we move house, I'm just going to have to either use the subscription services that I have for book if I want a new book, Audible, the library, or read from my extensive TBR of books that I haven't read yet. And that's fine. And I actually think it's quite a nice challenge. So in terms of plans for my channel, I do want to do more creative, more technical videos, I suppose. I want to do more sort of vlogging, and go back to like when I started my channel. I would do awful lot of creative stuff. I'm going to put up a little bit of footage here so you can see. I used to do top-down shots of me doing artwork and all sorts of things. So I think I'm going to try and go back to that. I was inspired the other day by watching the lovely Becky at Teacup the Storyteller doing her bullet journal setup. And if you've watched my video on Your Answer Can't Be Books tag, I talked a bit about the things that I like to do that don't involve reading, and bullet journaling is one of them. And I'm really hoping to get back into bullet journaling and art and all those sorts of things, and I think I want to incorporate them into the channel again, as I'd intended to do when I set the channel up. In terms of plans for January, lovely Emily over at Novel Novels is hosting a couple of things. One is the Past and Future Readathon with her pal Jem from Read a Book Gem, and they've got some really awesome prompts. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure my reading, I've left some wiggle room for some mood reading in January, and I want to see if my mood reading fits the prompts rather than picking books to fit the prompts, if that makes sense, and pressurizing myself to read them. So I know a couple of them fit the prompts already, because one of the things she's also doing is hosting an Anne along, which is a read along of Anne of Green Gables, one book a month. And I'm definitely doing that because I loved the first couple of books. I've reread the first book over and over again in my life, but I've never finished the series. So that's something I'm taking part in. And the other thing I want to do is join the group read for Equal Rights by Terry Pratchett. And that's again being hosted by Scott from Gunpowder Fiction and Plot, Katya from Read, Write, Create, Rosie Cockshut, and I can't remember the fourth person. I'm terrible, but I'll put all of these details in the description box below. What are your reading plans for the new year? Have you got plans? Are you going to do the no plan? I've got some structure, like I said, but I really want to leave my reading to be free and easy in so many ways. I just want to follow my nose. I want to read the buddy reads I want to read, but I also want to have wiggle room and room to just go, you know what, I fancy reading that. So yeah, let me know, what are your reading plans? I've checked out a few people's videos already, but if you're not someone who makes YouTube videos, I'd love to hear from you as well, because quite often I've seen other channels talk about this. We're talking back and forth with other YouTubers, but I actually want to talk to people who are watching who are not necessarily booktubers. If you're watching and you're just a reader who loves consuming the content, take part in the discussion. Have you got any reading plans for 2022? Have you decided you don't like plans? What's going on with you? Let me know. And if you've never been here before, consider subscribing, because I'm going to be doing regular reading rambles, I'm going to call them. That's what I've decided to call my videos instead of reading wrap-ups, because as you can see, I ramble a lot. So hopefully, if you do subscribe, if you've not been here before, I'll see you again here soon. Bye.